The year was 1944, and Europe was engulfed in flames. Cities once full of life were now reduced to rubble, their streets echoing with the sound of distant artillery and the silent whispers of those who hid in fear. In a small town on the outskirts of Warsaw, a 16-year-old boy named Jakub lived with his mother, Eliza. His father had been taken away 2 years prior, arrested by the Nazis during a raid on their home. Jakub's father had been a member of the Polish resistance, and now, every knock on the door felt like it could be the last for them too. Jakub wasn't a fighter. He was young, with a passion for books and music, but war doesn't ask for permission to change lives. In the months following his father's capture, Jakub had matured far beyond his years. He had taken up small tasks for the resistance, carrying messages, food, and sometimes even weapons. It was dangerous work, but with every mission, he felt closer to his father and the man he was forced to become. One cold autumn night, Jakub's life changed forever. He was returning from one such mission when he heard the familiar low rumble of tanks. Nazi patrols were growing more frequent in the town, and Jakub had become skilled at avoiding them. But something was different this time. The air felt heavy, like the town itself was holding its breath. As Jakub turned a corner, he saw it, his home, lit up in the night by the glow of fire. German soldiers stood outside, rifles in hand, while his mother screamed from the window, trying to break free from the soldiers dragging her into the street. Time seemed to stop for Jakub. His feet felt rooted to the ground, his heart pounding in his ears. Every fiber of his being told him to run, to escape. But this was his mother, he couldn't just leave. In a split-second decision, Jakub ducked into the shadows, watching in horror as the soldiers marched his mother away. He wanted to scream, but fear gripped him. Instead, he followed them, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen, but close enough to hear the muffled sobs of his mother. They led her to a train station. The haunting sound of the whistle pierced the night air as Jakub saw his mother being loaded into a cattle car, alongside other townspeople. This was no ordinary transport. It was one of the many deportation trains headed to the concentration camps. Jakub's mind raced. He had to do something, but he was just a boy. The resistance had taught him some tricks, but this was far beyond anything he'd been trained for. Yet, in his heart, he knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. His father had once told him that courage wasn't about not being afraid, it was about doing what's right despite the fear. With the last ounce of strength and determination, Jakub made his way to the resistance's hidden bunker. There, he met with Marek, an older man who had once served as a soldier in the Polish army before the Nazi occupation. Marek was gruff, scarred, and feared by many, but he had a soft spot for Jakub's father, and in turn, Jakub. "They've taken her," Jakub said breathlessly. "They're taking my mother to the camps." Marek's eyes narrowed. He knew what this meant. It was a death sentence. "We can't let them leave the town," Jakub pleaded. "We have to stop that train." Marek shook his head. "You're asking for a miracle, boy. There's no stopping those trains. Not without an army." But Jakub was relentless. "What if we derail it? What if we make sure it never reaches the camps?" For a moment, there was silence. Marek studied Jakub, seeing the desperation in his eyes, the same fire he'd seen in his father before the Nazis took him away. Finally, Marek sighed. "It's suicide," he muttered. "But if you're going, I'm going too." That night, under the cover of darkness, Jakub, Marek, and a small group of resistance fighters made their way to the train tracks just outside of town. Their plan was simple: place explosives on the rails and derail the train before it reached its destination. It was a long shot, but it was the only chance they had. As they worked in silence, the sound of the approaching train grew louder, the rhythmic chug of the engine like a heartbeat in the night. Jakub's hands trembled as he set the charges, his mind racing with thoughts of his mother. Would she survive the crash? Would they all be killed? There were no guarantees, but war had taught Jacob that there never were. The moment came. The train, a monstrous steel beast, hurtled towards them. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as Marek gave the signal. In an instant, the night erupted into chaos. The explosion was deafening, the train screeching as it derailed, metal twisting and crashing as carriages toppled off the tracks. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, the cries of the wounded began to pierce the air. Jacob didn't wait. He ran toward the wreckage, desperate to find his mother among the chaos. Bodies lay strewn across the tracks, soldiers and civilians alike. The stench of smoke and blood filled the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jacob spotted her, bruised, bloodied, but alive. He rushed to her side, tears streaming down his face as he helped her to her feet. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice trembling. "We don't have much time." But as they turned to leave, a shot rang out. Jacob felt the searing pain in his shoulder before he even heard the gunfire. He collapsed to the ground, his vision blurring. A German soldier stood a few feet away, rifle in hand, ready to finish the job. Before the soldier could fire again, Marek appeared, tackling the man to the ground. They struggled for a moment before Marek overpowered him, but not before taking a fatal blow himself. Jacob, despite the pain, crawled to Marek's side. The old man was bleeding out fast, his breaths shallow. "Get her out of here," Marek rasped. "Go. Live. For your father." Jacob nodded, tears blurring his vision as he watched the man who had been his father's friend, and now his savior, take his last breath. With his mother's help, Jacob managed to escape the wreckage. They fled into the woods, leaving behind the flames, the bodies, and the ruins of their former life. The war would drag on for another year, but Jacob and his mother survived, finding refuge with other resistance fighters until the Nazis were finally driven out. Jacob never forgot the sacrifice Marek made for them, and though the pain of loss was something he carried for the rest of his life, he knew that in the end, it was love, the love of family, of friends, of freedom, that had kept him going.